All right, here we are with part 2, explore the research sites. Look at that picture there. This is all ice, and it goes right into this lake here. So in this section, you'll investigate 3 tree ring sites in the northern latitudes that are of great interest to tree ring scientists. You're going to be looking at Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska, Ondor Zun Nuru in northern Mongolia, and Eso from Kamchatka Peninsula in the Far East region of Russia. All of these sites were used as part of a larger study that combined 54 tree ring sites from the northern latitudes to reconstruct northern hemisphere temperature variations over the past 1,000 years. You'll explore this reconstruction in part 4 of the lab, which unfortunately we will not be able to do. But here are the areas where you will be looking at. To get started in learning about how scientists reconstructed how temperature varied in the northern latitudes, let's learn more about the sites. It's important to understand the setting and ecology of the region or regions you are studying. How would you describe these sites? What types of trees and vegetation grow there, and who lives there and uses the forests? So, we're going to be exploring the tree ring site at Mendenhall Glacier. We're going to be using Google Maps for this. And you're going to be answering the first 2 questions as well. So once we open Google Maps, we're going to type in Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center. Into the search box. When the map comes up, click on Satellite View. Zoom out so you can see the location of the visitor center in relation to the glacier. The trail beginning at the visitor center is called E-Glacier Trail and is mapped with the 360-degree imagery. See figure to the right. The trees growing along this trail are near the coast, an area that is wetter than the interior. This region is part of the Pacific temperature rainforest ecosystem. The area is characterized by an annual rainfall of 33 to 105 inches. And that's kind of crazy because a lot of people don't think that, rainforest would be extremely cold, but rainforests are actually measured just by the amount of rain that they get. Generally, we think of them as being near the tropics. That's great biodiversity. It's home to 350 bird and mammal species and is dominated by many conifer species. Put that in there. Oh. Me up there, satellite view. All right, so there is the visitor center. And here is a couple trails. There's the East Glacier Trailhead. There's the lake. And you can see there's some snow a little ways back, and there's some snow right up here as well. Here's that glacier. Okay. Use the pegman to drop into various parts of the trail and describe the forest to the best of your ability. For example, are the forests diverse? Are there shrubs and other plants? Is there a lot of soil that you can see, or do you see mostly broad flat leaf, deciduous trees, or conifers? Tree ring scientists are always looking for old trees, and you can't tell how old a tree is just by looking at it, but some hints that a tree are old is that it has a wider trunk, lower branches will be thicker. A tree that looks like it is spiraling and twisting is also a good indicator of age. After exploring around the site, what are the oldest looking trees you can identify and take a screenshot? So we're going to be describing the nature of the forest along the trail, and then you're going to be pasting your screenshot in here. So here's my little pegman, and I will just see, I'll try dropping them in there and see what happens. Oh, wow. Okay, so there is a conifer right above me. Looks like it's mainly conifers. There are some shrubs or some grasses. This is a gravel path. And you can actually walk along the path. Here's a little flat leaf deciduous tree that's attempting to grow. Talk about soil if you see any soil anywhere. And you may have to move around in order to get that screenshot of that old tree, because right now I'm not seeing any really wide trunked trees. So I would not take a screenshot of any of this particular area here. But I'll leave you guys to finding your own screenshots. Moving on, we're going to explore trees near the site of northern Mongolia. You might wonder why Mongolia. Why travel to such an isolated part of the world to do tree ring science? Some scientists get inspired by unexpected events. Listen to Dr. Roseanne D'Arrigo describe how she began decades-long research effort in Mongolia. Okay, and this is going to help us to answer questions numbers 4 and 5.
Roseanne D'Arrigo, endocrinologist at the Turing Lab at Lamont Doherty. I am a Lamont Research Professor here, and I'm also the Associate Director of the Division of Biology and Paleoenvironment. I started working in Mongolia and getting interested in Mongolia through a kind of chance occurrence. I just happened to see an article about a documentary by a German woman, director-producer, about Mongolia, and I could see in a photo with the article that there were trees there that looked like they could potentially be interesting and old enough and of the right type, which is like evergreen trees, for studying past climates. So I decided to go to this movie, which was actually about 6 hours long. But every once in a while, there would be a pan of the landscape in the background that would show trees, and I would get very excited and look to see if those trees looked interesting to me. And they did seem, in fact, to look very interesting and potentially could be something that we'd want to look at and study in the future. And I'm also very adventurous, so I'm always looking for places that are very remote and haven't been studied before for possible work in dendrochronology. So I had gotten to know one of the students who worked with the dinosaur scientists at the Museum of Natural History. And so we talked a few times about their work on the dinosaurs in the southern Mongolian area of the Gobi. And one day we were sitting together on the bus up to Lamont, and he said, you really have to go right back down to the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan because the Minister of Science for the whole country is there visiting right now, and maybe he could help you get a permit. So as soon as the bus got to Lamont, I turned around and I took the bus right back to Manhattan and ran over to the Museum of Natural History. Then inbounded this young Mongolian scientist who looked really no more than 15 years old. And he was very, very friendly, and I told him what we wanted to do, which was to go and visit Mongolia and study the old-growth trees there, but that we didn't know anyone there. We didn't have any permits or anything like that. So at that point, he looked into his briefcase, and he came out with a piece of paper which had official letterhead from his office, and he stamped it, and he signed it, and he said, "Here, this is your permit. We'll see you in Mongolia next year." We found some fantastic old-growth sites. And so we went and we started our science, which we've been continuing ever since, of the last few decades, of looking at these incredible old-growth trees there and using them to provide a long-term context for past climatic change, not only in Mongolia, but also in the larger scale northern extratropics of the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay, so let's look at question number 4 then. What sparked Dr. D'Arrigo's interest in doing research in Mongolia? So she was reading an article about a documentary that was coming out about Mongolia, and she noticed the trees in the advertisement, and she thought that they looked really interesting, just simply by looking at an advertisement. Explain the circumstances that led to Dr. D'Arrigo starting a major research project in Mongolia. She knew a student from the American Museum of Natural History in New York that was studying dinosaurs in Mongolia. When she expressed her interest in working there, the student told her about the Minister of Science from Mongolia visiting the museum at the moment. And she rushed to the museum, met with the minister, and got a handwritten permit to work there the next summer. The main point here is that sometimes serendipitous events lead to amazing research projects. Okay, so next. When you mention Mongolia, most people think of Genghis Khan, traditional Mongolian wrestling, or a region with great grassy plains, but there's also relatively pristine old-growth forests growing in many regions of Mongolia that have been revered by the people who live there and are of great interest to scientists. Right-click to open this image of the traditional Mongolian winter camp. near Ondorzurun Nuru, a place you might camp if you travel to Mongolia to study trees in this region. Notice how many trees are growing nearby. To examine the trees found at the OZN site, right-click on this link. Oh, wow. Okay. It's a very beautiful forest behind us here. Okay, so that was that one. Describe the site conditions in the forest you see from the two 360 images. So just, looking at this one here, there's a lot of like really open grassy areas, and then there's a very large dense forest at one end. The same part there. Maybe it's the same one. How does this forest differ from the one you looked at in Mendenhall Glacier, Alaska? So compare the two. The one looked a lot more dense in Alaska, but there's a lot more diversity as well, whereas in northern Mongolia, the conditions must be a little bit drier, and it looks like pretty much all the trees are like the same. Explore the trees from the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia now. It's an extremely remote peninsula. This area is so remote that very little of the peninsula is mapped with a 360 view of imagery. Take a look at the trees that are growing near an important research site named Esso. There are quite a few older looking trees in this image if you look carefully. Hopefully we wouldn't be sampling tree cores in winter with snow on the ground. Summer is far better to launch a field expedition. Right-click on the link to open it in a new window, pan around and examine the site, and we will answer questions 7 and 8, which will actually be questions 8 and 9. I don't know why they're labeled not correctly on this particular sheet. Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's a lot of snow here. I would not want to be traveling or trying to walk around on that because it looks a little bit deep and difficult. That looks like an older tree. That also looks like an older tree. So describe the environment. It's obviously very wide open. It looks pretty remote as well. You can see that there are large open areas. If they weren't covered with snow, they would be grassy areas. You can see that there are very large and old trees visible that are open canopy, meaning that they are not terribly crowded by other trees, so they each have their own individual space to grow. There's no overcrowding here. The harsh conditions would make this region excellent for dendrochronological studies. And the last question that we're doing with our lab is, how does this site compare to the site from Alaska and Mongolia? Is there anything that they have in common? Note any significant differences among the three sites. So Alaska is a really popular tourist area. It doesn't take much to reach the areas where people rarely go. All the sites are relatively remote. They contain long-lived trees. Mongolia and Esso are high latitude, high elevation dry sites, and because Alaska is on the coast, it receives more rain than the other sites, which is evident in the diversity of the plant species. And that is the last part of our labs that you will be doing. I hope you enjoyed this. It was a different kind of activity. You learned a little bit about how tree dating works and also about just the climate in general and how the tree dating helps to affect that. All right, guys. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.